Well, Ray once said to me that music was more important to him than cinema. He was from Bengal, and that's very important to his identity. And all his films, bar two or three, reflect Bengali culture, including The Music Room, of course. This is the one film where he actually does use music and dance as an integral part. He'd made two parts of his most famous films, the Oppu trilogy, before that, about a young boy growing up in India in the 20th century. And then he began a very different kind of project. It's so different that you might almost think it's made by a different director. It's about the feudal class, so it's very different from the picture of village poverty and village life that you might see in the Oppu trilogy. I think he needed a winner at the box office because the first film in the Oppu trilogy was made in 1955 and was a big success and won awards at the Cannes Film Festival. The second film won an award at the Venice Film Festival, but it didn't do very well at the box office in his home country. So I think he chose The Music Room because it had a lot of song and dance in it, and nobody had done that before in Indian cinema with classical music. So he thought he had a new idea and he could get an audience for that. And he also chose a very well-known actor. He was the lead male actor in Bengal at that time, called Chubby Biswas. And finally, I suppose he knew that if he chose some very good musicians, people would come to hear the music and, you know, hopefully enjoy the film as well. Tarashankar Banerjee wrote a story called Jalsaghar, The Music Room, in 1934, and it became a classic in Bengal, and Ray obviously read it, probably when he was in his teenage years, and then he came back to it in the 1950s and thought, well, everyone knows this story, and it has real potential for the cinema, so why don't I pick up that? The complicated thing here is that he was at work on The Music Room, and then Chubby Biswas, the lead, had to go and collect a prize in Berlin. And he was a fairly imperious actor, so he just went and left Ray hanging. The film had to stop while Biswas was abroad. So Ray said, I'd better get to work on another film in the meantime. So he very quickly made a comedy called The Philosopher's Stone. Because there was a break in the shooting, he became more and more interested in the character of the zamindar, the landowner, and he decided to develop that more and have the music, in a sense, less prominent. Of course, there's a lot of music, but actually the main character is what holds your interest, I think. In the original story, cholera actually attacks the household and kills 3 children and the wife and leaves the zamindar standing alone. But Ray decided to take another detail from the story in which one of the zamindar's ancestors loses his wife and son in a boating accident. And he made that the driving plot element in the film. He then feels guilty in a way that actually in the original story he doesn't. And I think that's one of the reasons that Ray would have made that change, is that it's more psychologically interesting for the main character to feel that he is partly responsible. It's a time of year in Bengal where there's a lot of storms. It's known as Kal Boishakhi, which is the stormy season. So he was taking a risk in asking them to go on the river at that time, but of course, for the sake of the music, he was prepared to do that. I think that Ray had a certain difficulty, which is that Chubby Biswas was not, unfortunately, very musical. In fact, he was almost tone deaf. So Ray had to direct him in the role quite carefully. Where it came to listening to music, he had to explain how you should look at certain points in the concert so that you look like you're a connoisseur of music. And there was one scene in which Biswas is listening in a chair at night to the music drifting through the air from the neighbor's mansion. And he's becoming rather restive because, you know, he doesn't like the rivalry, but he likes the music. And at one point, Ray has him lift one of his fingers at a particular moment in the music. And that is to show that he understood the rhythmic cycle of 16 beats in the music. Because there's a tradition when you listen to the music, if you are a connoisseur, that you show that you know it by lifting your finger at the end of the 16 beats. So Ray said to Biswas, look, I'll just take this shot and you just lift your finger like this whenever you like, and then I will deal with that in the editing. And to those who really care about Indian music, it's obvious that he understands the music from the way he lifts his finger. But in real life, of course, Biswas didn't have any idea what he was doing. This is a film about feudalism. There's the Mughals, and they created a land-owning class of feudal princes. And then the British took over, and they took over the feudal system, really. But in the 19th century, they created a class of feudal nobles who were loyal to the British power, essentially, and of course quite westernized in their taste, as you see from this film. The house of the Zamindar has Greek columns and things like that, and they had a lot of land. So we have 7 generations here of landowners and a Zamindar who is the last of the line. And by now the money has run out. He still has the land, but a lot of it is being swept away by the river, which is the Ganges, and the house that he owns is standing on the banks of the river. So literally the river is eating his land. He has very little income, and whatever he has, he's spending on music. The Mughals were great patrons of music, but then the Mughals lost power, so the tradition of music was carried on by the feudal nobles. However oppressive they may have been as landowners, they did care about classical music, and many of the musicians who we now hear in the Indian classical scene, their fathers and grandfathers lived on these estates. Ravi Shankar also has connections with feudal landowners who were patrons of his forebears. I think Indian classical music would have died out to a great extent without these feudal patrons. I think Ray respects the love of music that the Zamindars had. He is an Indian, but he comes from the east, from Calcutta, the metropolis of India. In the 1920s when he was born, it was the former British capital of India before it moved to Delhi. And that was the cultural capital of India in those days. Bengali culture was more influenced by the West than other parts of India because the capital was in Calcutta. So you have the East India Company arriving, establishing their business premises in Calcutta, their trade, shipping, and all the things that go with a big company. And they created a class of Bengalis who were entrepreneurs who worked for them. And then, of course, they became rich and they started educating their children who became interested in literature and the arts and intellectual matters. Satyajit Ray became very interested in music at a very early age, largely because of his grandfather and father. His father was a very good singer, his grandfather was a violinist, and music was in the blood. But the really strong interest from the age of about 15 was Western classical music. He just became passionate about Beethoven, and he got to know Western music extremely well because he was musically gifted. And then he became a filmmaker, and he started using Indian music as well and becoming knowledgeable about that too, but that was not until later in his 30s. He does say that by the time he made the music room, he could name the ragas that he wanted from Vilayat Khan and Imrat Khan and the other musicians in the film. In other Indian films at the time of the music room, music was essentially used for a scene and then the scene moved on to something else. There wouldn't be any attempt to integrate the action and the singing into the plot. Ray was very much against making this in that way. The dancing, of course, is used effectively in a very exciting, electrifying performance. The bells on her feet get faster and faster, and her footwork gets more and more nimble and complicated. There are cutaways to the Zamindar and the rest of the audience who are gripped, of course. And I think he also felt the center of this film is this character and his life and what makes him tick, and his relationship with his rival. And I do not want the music to overwhelm that. The Khyal singer has a complicated, ornate, filigree voice, and it does accent the anxiety of the scene rather excitingly, because we can see the flickering storm out of the windows, and we know that the Zamindar is getting more anxious. And then he looks into his glass, and he sees a struggling insect. And the suggestion is made in the audience's mind that things are going to turn rather dark. And of course, after that, we discover that his wife and son have drowned in the river. Almost always it explores the emotions and the state of mind of the character. I've often said that Ray is one of the great psychologists in the cinema. I mean, little gestures speak volumes with him. You can almost see the central character thinking when he's trying to rival his businessman who's trying to hold a music ceremony which is equally splendid to his. At one point, there's a storm brewing, and he's looking out of the window, worried about his wife and son. You just hear a little thud on the soundtrack, and he turns around and he sees that a wooden model ship has fallen over because the wind has blown it over. And it's very subtly done. You feel the tension building, and he goes over and he just gently puts it upright. Now, many directors would make more of that, but Ray just lets you know that there's a symbol at work, but he doesn't stress it. In the Greek dramas, some of the most dramatic things happen off stage, and there's something of that in the music room. The death of the wife and son in the drowning accident, effectively, we don't see that. I think he wanted to dwell in one man's mind and one house to intensify that feeling of inward absorption and decay and isolation. I mean, there's a very famous shot in the film, which is used as a still by Ray, of the old man leaning on a stick wearing his embroidered coat, seen from the back, and in the distance there's the elephant grazing. And it's famous because it's beautiful composition, but also it's, in a sense, the ancient values being obscured by the modern values of these lorries, which are blowing dust in front of this elephant. So I think that that's an example of where, you don't really go very far out of the palace, but you still get a sense of his past world just by looking out from his point of view. One of the most wonderful things in the film, actually, I think, is the way electric lighting and lorries and modern things are suddenly intruding into this age-old setting.
কিসের আওয়াজ হচ্ছে দেখতো? ইলেকট্রিক কল বসিয়েছে হুজুর। ইলেকট্রিক কল?
And that would have been the 1920s. That's when electric generators started coming in.
গাঙ্গুলি বাবুদের নতুন বাড়িতে হুজুর ছাদে উঠলে পরে আলোর রোশনি দেখা যায় মহিমের বাড়ি আগে হ্যাঁ হুজুর
And you know, suddenly India is beginning to change, and these people are going to have to start changing with it. I think Ray's sympathies are somewhat divided. He is somewhat sympathetic with the old zamindar, but he also has some respect for the enterprise of the new class, though he does not respect their values very much. Nehru was Prime Minister at that time and had just declared that dams were the new temples of India. So science was on the up. And Ray was sympathetic to science. I mean, he did actually study science, and his father studied science. So I think he did appreciate that India needed to modernize, and the film, to some extent, supports that. But I have to say that his real sympathy in this film is for the music. I think this film was a bit of a disappointment for Ray in terms of its box office success. And he told me it ran very well for about 7 weeks in Calcutta, and then it tailed off. And as so often in his career, films that he thought would not do well abroad did do well. In some cases, some films he thought would do well abroad didn't. So it's not easy to predict. And The Music Room is a good example, I think, of a film that did much better than he had ever imagined. The Music Room is a great introduction to Ray's work. And if you see that and you see the Apu trilogy, you'll become very tantalized to know what else he got up to as a director.